Welcome to this knowledge session, Being Future Ready with Edge Green Building Certification. Before I introduce you to Author, who's going to take you to a wonderful, enlightening session, I'm Jayashree Mendes, editor of Construction Week India, and I'd like to give you a little brief of the magazine. We're a 13-year-old magazine, a Dubai-based company, and we were out of India. The magazine is brought out of India, Construction Week. And now we have a very, very important event, which is Construction Week Awards coming up in September. We'd like to invite nominations from across the country, and we have winners this time across regions, with green building being a very, very major category for us. Let me introduce you to Author Said, your lead for this evening. Author Said leads the green building program across South Asia for International Finance Corporation, which is part of the World Bank Group. As part of the program, he is responsible for increasing the adoption of green buildings through investments, certificate standards, and skill development. An architect by training, he has helped development of green building codes and policies in 7 countries and investments of about 1 billion USD in green buildings. Over to you, Author.
Thanks, Jayashree, and good afternoon, good morning to everyone who's attending. As Jayashree said, I work for International Finance Corporation, and it's my pleasure to be here with all of you today, sharing some of my experience and the work that we're doing. So let me share my screen, and then we'll quickly go through the presentation. So the topic of today is being future ready with Edge Green Building Certification. So might be intriguing, what do we mean by future ready, and what kind of future we are talking about? So let's go into a little bit of that and try to find some tools, some ways of being prepared for what is about to come, what we expect would happen in the next few years and decades. Mahatma Gandhi said that the future really depends on what we do in the present. In case we are wondering, any of us are wondering, why do we need to talk about this now? Future is unknown anyways. But to a large extent, future is driven by today, by what we do today and the planning that we put in place that would be implemented over the next few years. So that's what we're talking about. But more specifically, we're talking about the future of real estate business today. What are some of the key challenges and opportunities we see in this business? The key question that I have for everyone on this call is, will your business or your client's business survive and thrive when these things happen? When energy and water are really charged at their actual prices. So many of us know that what we pay for energy and water is typically not the full price, not the real price of those resources. For example, we don't really pay for the environmental pollution caused by our power plants that are producing the energy that we use. And similarly for water, we are not really paying the degradation, the pollution that is happening to the environment because of our extraction of that clean drinking water. So, and gradually this is going to happen. This is already happening in certain parts of the world. And in India as well, we will start to see some of that, those non-tangible impacts being included as part of our resource pricing. The second part of this is the future that we see is any negative impact that our buildings create on the environment is penalized heavily. And conversely, any positive impact that we create on the environment could be incentivized, could be awarded. Are we ready for that? Are we ready to avail of those incentives if they're available? And thirdly, we see a lot of clients and investors right now, mostly international investors, but gradually even the local ones are starting to prefer green properties over others. Green meaning more sustainable, more energy efficient, more water efficient, healthier environment. So there is already a preference, and this preference can in some cases result in premiums. So are we ready to avail of those premiums, be on the top of that list of green properties that our clients are now preparing? So let's look at some new snippets from recent times, which kind of give an indication of where the future is headed. The Environment Ministry of India is planning to put fines on projects that violate environmental norms. So nothing very drastic about it, but now it is becoming more and more concrete on what exactly comprises a violation, what kind of violations, and how much fine. They're starting with a small term, but gradually it will increase. So if you see in the fine print here, it says along with a jail sentence of 5 years. So who really wants to go to jail for 5 years for polluting the environment? If no, for no other reason, this could be a big enough reason for making our buildings more green. In UK, the government has announced that a company that has not published their carbon reduction plans and committed to phasing out greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 will not be able to get the government contracts, the UK state contracts. That again is a lost business opportunity for those who are not really paying attention to this future. The tariffs are going up as well, and especially since the Ukraine-Russia war in the last year, the energy prices have gone up, and there seems to be no real indication that they would fall back even if the war stops right now. And the tariffs for water are increasing as well. And on the investment side, as I said, there are many investors who are now really prioritizing this. There are some investors who are saying that we will only invest in properties that have a minimum impact on the environment. The extreme is this example from UK. This investor has said that we will make the bosses of the companies where we are investing in accountable for climate impact. So if they fail to make positive impact, they might actually try to reduce those managers, those bosses from the company. So it is really, this change is really happening. It is present in many parts of the world, and it is increasing to our part of the world as well. Now, there are several global initiatives that have been taken by numerous organizations. Probably the most well-known are these COP, the COP climate conferences that have been happening over the last many years. And they've been looking at different sectors and have already identified the building sector as the key reason, one of the key reasons for climate change. And while doing that, they also figured out that the building sector is also one of the most cost-efficient ways of mitigating, of reducing climate change. So therefore, a lot of emphasis has been placed on climate-related and building-related initiatives through COP. The big agreement that happened at COP21 in Paris, there they were able to kind of give a very concrete target that all new buildings to be built by 2030 should meet a zero carbon standard. And we'll talk more about what that really means, a zero carbon standard. At the same time, all buildings, new and existing, should meet the zero carbon standard by 2050. So I think this is very important. These are targets globally for all construction around the world, new or existing. They're saying if we have to meet those targets to avoid catastrophic change in the climate, we have to meet those zero carbon standards for a building. Now, that is a fairly ambitious target, but something that has been proved to be very practical, very implementable. And we'll see some examples, some very concrete ideas that could help us achieve those targets. And several governments are now starting to adopt these standards, incentivize buildings that meet standards. Several investors are now kind of recognizing that as their climate ambition as well. So this is very important, and we'll focus a lot on zero carbon today. Because this is going to be a key kind of a buzzword for the future. So I believe most of the people on the call today would be building professionals who are involved in the industry in some way or the other, guiding the decision-making regarding buildings. So while most of our task is focused on meeting the needs of the occupants, the programmatic needs, the space needs, we should also be equipped with sufficient understanding of zero carbon buildings. What does it really mean? How do we get there? How do we design those zero carbon buildings with minimal impact on cost? And at the same time, we should also be equipped with the softer skills of analysis. How do we figure out what is the best option? The skill of communication. How do we kind of convey this message, this business case that we prepared for climate smart buildings to other decision makers, such as building owners and investors? Because unless we do that, unless people are convinced, people in the decision making authority, whether it's the public sector or the private sector, unless they're convinced, they won't really act on it. So I think it is the onus is on us as building professionals to kind of make this happen. So as I said, we often focus on the programmatic need fitting in the urban context. We talk a lot about aesthetics. Those are all good things, and we should continue to keep our focus on that. But we need to broaden our horizon and also start at looking at these other key elements. Are we providing a healthy indoor environment inside our buildings? Are we really optimizing the operational cost of the buildings and doing this without really causing a big burden, increasing the burden on the environment outside through pollution, through greenhouse gases and other such elements? Are we taking care of these three elements as well? That's an important kind of focus expansion that we need to have if we need to meet the future that we want. So as urban designers, as planners, as public officials, we often envision our cities, our urban environments to be these lush, green, very livable, very pleasant environment. But we all know the reality, what really happens when the rubber hits the road. We see congestion, we see resource shortages, we see pollution, we see inefficient waste usage and wastage of resources. And to a large extent, building professionals, the ones who are guiding the decision makers, who are guiding the investments, are responsible for a lot of this chaos. But we are also part of the solution. So let's try to focus on that too. So a few examples of what the future might hold with regards to our buildings. Air conditioning. Right now, very small percentage of Indian buildings use air conditioning, even though temperature in most of our cities really goes fairly high in summers. And the adoption of air conditioning in India and some of the other developing countries, tropical developing countries, is growing very rapidly. It's probably the fastest growing energy consumption, energy end use amongst all end users. And if we continue at the same pace, Mumbai, just the city of Mumbai, will require cooling as much as quarter of United States. And of course, there are many other cities in India and South Asia besides Mumbai. Most of the developing countries are where the new construction is happening. So that's why our focus as an organization is also on the developing countries, on the emerging markets. The unfortunate fact is a lot of poverty is also in these same countries. And the bottom of the pyramid, the lowest income bracket that we have in these countries, are typically not able to avail of these comforts inside building. And if they do try to do that, they end up spending a lot of their income on those standards. So if, for example, if a low income household installs an air conditioning just because they want to be more comfortable, they'll probably end up paying 20, 30, 40% of their monthly income just to run the air conditioner. So that's something that we really need to find solutions for. Air pollution is another big issue, especially in South Asia. This scene that you see is not very uncommon if you go to many of our cities, especially in northern India, and this is probably in Bangladesh, where you see a lot of air pollution from brick kilns. Brick kilns are the ovens manufacturing the bricks. In Dhaka itself, it's said that about 58% of the air pollution is coming from manufacturing of bricks, not from transportation, not from other sources, but from bricks. So if we can find cleaner solutions, we can have a positive impact on our public health as well. The good news is we still have a lot of opportunity in front of us. About 80% of the economically viable, meaning the options that have very good returns on investment in buildings are still untapped. We are not really tapping, we are not really utilizing a lot of those opportunities that are out there that can help us building become more thermally better as well as environmentally lighter, and at a cost that is still has good returns. What we really see happening in many of our cities, especially the larger cities, is kind of romanticizing of some of our buildings and without paying much attention to the impact down the line on the environment and the economy. This example is from London, from UK. This is a fairly famous building, and the architect obviously had a lot of visions and romantic ideas about it. But this building, even in the UK climate, is an environmental and an economic disaster. And if you translate this, if you transpose this to India or similar climates, tropical climates, what you see is this. And this is again is not very uncommon. If you walk around any downtown in any large metro in South Asia, you will see buildings with full glass curtain walls. The idea being we'll have transparency, we'll have views, we have excellent daylights, and it'll look like a modern building. The reality is these full glass curtain walls, they cost a lot. Then they allow too much light and heat inside. Even if you have like double pane glass, low E glass, still they allow a lot of heat to come inside. And the reality is people then put up their blinds, put down shades. And when they do that, the interiors become dark. So they have to turn on the lights, and the air conditioner also it has to be oversized. So it's a lose-lose situation, because we are losing on capital cost. We are also losing on operational costs in this way. A more mature solution would be to optimize the facade, the size of glass, the orientation of glass, the specification of glass, and have just enough glass in there, just enough transparent surfaces to meet our lighting needs, meet our views needs, without really getting excessive heat inside. So this is just one kind of a snippet of the kind of decision making that can help us in making our future more sustainable. Often we see some preconceived ideas. People think what might be a green solution, but in reality may not be. This is a bus in France. So somebody in the government thought it would be a great idea to actually put vegetation on their buses. It would be a green idea. It would convey that they are very serious about environment. But in reality, what does that do? It adds a lot of dead weight onto the engine, onto the bus. So it has to use more energy to drive. Plus, there is a lot of maintenance cost added as well. So in reality, that does not really help in the environment at all. So we are using a similar approach in our building design. So what I see as 3 essential skills for future professionals is firstly optimizing our technical solutions through proper analysis. We have a lot of choices. How do we come up with the best solution for my building? Because every building is unique. It's almost like human beings. They have different requirements. They have different circumstances, different usage patterns. So the solution for every building is going to be unique. We cannot just take solution from one building, one location, and adopt it across the board. There has to be some basis, some logic, some analysis to justify that. The second key skill that I would propose is awareness of the key metrics. What I mean by that is there are these terms that you will keep hearing more and more. And some of them are common even now. Capital cost, operational cost, carbon emissions. Are we able to help the people who are looking at these elements with our design making, with our decision making? Are we able to minimize the capital cost? Are we able to minimize their operational cost? Are we able to quantify the carbon emissions? Are we able to figure out how much water is being saved? Are we able to figure out the return on investment for our investors? So as building professionals, That's our role to help in that as well. And the third part, which I mentioned earlier, is communication and convincing. Once we have this data, we need to make a very strong business case to the decision makers that low carbon buildings, low carbon development is the way to go economically as well as environmentally. That is the future. And if we don't do that, then we'll be missing out on a lot of opportunities that we just talked about. So we talked about zero carbon buildings earlier. And you remember at COP21, we talked about these two targets that were set. So how do we go about this? So only a small percentage of our buildings are new, if you look at the entire building stock. And that is a relatively easier target, the 2030 target. I'm saying relatively, but still there's a lot of effort to be made to get to zero carbon for new buildings. And eventually we want all buildings to be zero carbon. That is a much bigger task, to retrofit our existing buildings to make sure that they have a net zero impact. When we say net zero, what we really mean is the amount of carbon emissions that you're emitting, your building is emitting through manufacturing, through operations, is offset by renewable energy that has zero or minimal carbon impact. So there are great examples of this already, but they've achieved it through kind of a process that we'll talk about. That process is fairly simple. But before we go there, let's quickly look at some of the definitions. There are multiple definitions around for this. I mentioned net zero. That's kind of an older term. Net zero. Now we just call it zero carbon, although in reality it really means net zero. There is also a nearly zero energy building, which means that it has minimized the energy consumption. It doesn't really talk about renewable energy. Then we have net zero energy building, which is saying that all your energy needs should come from renewable sources. Then there's a net zero carbon. There's a slight difference between zero energy and zero carbon. Zero energy is just focusing on the fuel, on the energy fuel. Whereas zero carbon is looking at the environmental impact of manufacturing that fuel, whether it is electricity coming from a coal-based power plant, or electricity coming from a solar farm, or electricity coming from a hydroelectric project. They all have different carbon impacts. We're trying to quantify that carbon impact from all the resource use, all the energy use, whether it's diesel used for generator or electricity used for lighting and other operations, convert all of that into carbon. And then the renewable energy that you're getting, that also has a positive carbon impact. So we're trying to match those and see if you're able to have a net zero impact. In the future, what we'll see is this outside rectangle, which is net zero carbon building, including embodied carbon. That really means the amount of energy used to manufacture materials is also energy related to our buildings. That also needs to be converted into carbon and combined in this calculation, in this optimization process. So if we can offset that manufacturing energy and manufacturing carbon through renewable sources, that then we'll achieve a net zero carbon building. So that standard is not yet very common, but it is going to, over the next few years and decades, I think you'll see more and more of that. What we really see is net zero carbon or just zero carbon, which basically means the same thing. So the definition that is commonly used for zero carbon building is a highly energy efficient building that has at least 40% more energy efficiency than the business as usual, than the baseline, and is fully powered from on-site or off-site renewable energy. And in the last instance, the last resort, it can also purchase carbon offsets from other sources outside. Carbon offset is basically somebody else reducing the carbon emission and selling those credits to somebody who really needs that for a price, obviously. So the net zero emissions race basically has already started. Multiple countries have made commitments, including India. India has committed that by 2070, the Indian economy will be net zero carbon. So net zero carbon, again, and we're talking about economy-wide zero carbon. The buildings are somewhat easier as compared to many other sectors. So I would say that the target for the building sector should not be 2070 for India, but much earlier, because that is kind of the low-hanging fruit as compared to the other sectors. And we see many financial institutions, many companies already adopting these standards. These are some of the leading global investors. You see, they are prioritizing investment in zero carbon, low carbon, and highly efficient projects already. I mentioned carbon a few times. So carbon trading or carbon pricing is again something that we will probably see much more in the future. So carbon pricing needs that we need to quantify, we need to analyze how much carbon would our building have consumed or emitted in a business as usual scenario. And by putting in these efficiency measures, how much are we reducing it? And that reduction is what we can trade off. We can sell it to somebody who needs it for meeting their own standards. So multiple countries around the world have started a process to trade carbon. And this news just from last week in India is that there is a new bill in the parliament, which is trying to set up this regulatory framework for carbon trading in India. So that is a very kind of encouraging news. And hopefully this would provide one more opportunity for green buildings, for efficient buildings to be profitable. So in order to make our buildings green, there are lots of options. There are tons of opportunities, and I'm talking about technical measures here that we can use. These are some of them. You can look at building site planning. You can look at optimizing your envelope. You can look at natural lighting, electrical lighting with controls and more efficient lamps. You can look at plug load optimization, look at water heating reduction, and the biggest in use, which is typically air conditioning, minimizing the need for air conditioning and using the best possible air conditioning system to provide that. And lastly, renewable energy. So not every project can use all these options, and not all the options would be the most suitable for every project. So how do we figure out which option is the most suitable one for me? That is often a question, and the typical answer to that is hire a consultant, a team that would do all the analysis and provide you that your best solution, your optimum solution. And that is a feasible, that is a genuine solution to that. However, not every project can afford that. And not every project can afford to have that team right from the beginning of the project. So what we need is something that would kind of guide the design decisions in the right direction very early on in the design stage. And that way we can optimize our cost as well, or capital cost. So the major elements of greening that we typically look at is first the siting. Where do we build? Are we disrupting the natural and the social systems that are existing on that site? Is our location optimum for transportation? People coming in and out, do they have to drive their own cars to get to that place, or they can use public transport, or is it close to an existing transportation hub? That's one element. And then going down to the building itself, the structure of the building, how do we minimize the demand for resources? How do we meet the demand efficiently? And then how do we source that energy that is used to provide to kind of run those appliances, those systems? And this is applicable not just for energy, but for water as well. So if we minimize the need for water, they minimize the need for energy. And we do this by kind of looking at the demand. Let's say an office building. it has a lot of demand for air conditioning, a lot of demand for lighting. But we often see that even when the office space is empty, the air conditioner is still on, the lights are still on, and that's just wastage. So if we can put in controls that automatically either change the temperature set point or switch off air conditioning completely, switch off lights automatically, that way we are minimizing the demand for those resources. And this can also be done through passive design, through making sure that we're not getting excessive heat from the building envelope. We're not getting excessive light from the building envelope. We are getting enough natural ventilation, natural light. Those kind of things really help in reducing our demand. And usually these are low cost items, so they don't really add to the capital cost. And once we've done that first bit, then using the efficient mechanical, electrical, and water systems to meet those needs. So the best air conditioning possible, the best lighting system possible, the best water system, meaning the lowest flow rates possible. And then the sourcing is where the renewable energy comes into play. So whatever energy we need to run those appliances, is it coming from clean sources? Same for water as well. Are we able to use the water that's already available on site through rainwater, through recycled water, the STP water? Are we able to put it back in our building rather than just throw it off into the drain? Those are all going to add to our sustainability for our building. And even materials, sourcing materials that have lowest manufacturing energy will also add to that sustainability. So if you look at it graphically, this is what the hierarchy of decision making really looks like. So the hierarchy of decision making, meaning which decisions do we take first? So we minimized energy demand, increase the efficiency, use renewable sources, and then the last resort, whatever is left, offset through carbon trading, carbon offsets, etc. Now, what about benchmarks? What is the target? So we did talk about zero carbon target, but there should be some intermediate targets as well, something that we can maybe achieve very quickly on the way to zero carbon. Typically, in most of the developing countries, there is either no mandatory green building or energy efficiency code, or if there is one, it is not fully implemented. Example, in India, ECBC has been around into 2007, and despite a lot of efforts by the government and the private sector, the implementation is still very patchy. Some states have adopted it, some have not. And even in the ones that have been adopted, not every building is really meeting those standards. But that is kind of setting the minimum standard that every building should have right now. What we want is a progressive increase in the efficiency of the buildings that we are building. So just looking at the energy standard, for example, we see that most of the green building certification systems right now require somewhere around 20% reduction as compared to the baseline. And the baseline we are saying is what is typically happening, what is the normal business as usual practice. So most certification systems talk about around 20% energy efficiency as the minimum to achieve their first level of certification. But if you want a higher level of achievement, then you would like to go closer to like the 40-50% mark, which is achievable in many buildings. And then the kind of the holy grail, what we really want to get at is 100% reduction. Now, 100% reduction is by itself is almost impractical, because we cannot completely remove energy from our building. We still need it for lighting, we still need it for lifts, we still need it for air conditioning. So what we really mean by 100% is combining the renewable energy with energy efficiency. The net impact is 100% reduction. Some may say we are already doing great, we are adopting green standards anyways. We don't really need a certification system. What's the point of this? Just some extra expense and some extra effort. Why should we go for it? There are some advantages to this. First is you get some market validity. The investors that we talked about earlier who are looking at providing green finance, they need some sort of validation. Without a green building certificate, without third-party check, they will not do it. Even the government incentives cannot be availed without some kind of a third-party verification or certification. Then it can be used for our own monitoring. How are we doing against our own performance in the last year and the year before that? Or across the portfolio, if you are a multiple asset portfolio owner, how does one property compare against the other? And also then comparing against the peers, other buildings of similar usage, similar location, how are they doing? So certification does provide some of this market validation and comparison. If you look at the landscape of green buildings in India, you see multiple certification systems around with multiple elements or kind of focus areas. So the 7 or 8 categories that you see, these are typical across LEED, IGBC, and GREHA. With EDGE, which is IFC's green building certification, the focus is more on resource efficiency because we believe these are kind of the key areas that can be influenced and monitored quickly. So the focus is on energy efficiency, water efficiency, and material efficiency. If we compare all these systems, they all have their strengths and weaknesses. So the EDGE system has been kind of developed as something that can be used to guide the design teams, guide the developers, architects, engineers, right from the programmatic stage, right from when they just started thinking about the project. What kind of options are feasible? It can be used for calculating the return on investment. It can be used for quantifying carbon impact. It can be used as a criteria for climate finance, for green finance. A LEED also has access to that because LEED is internationally recognized. GREHA and IGBC are not yet globally recognized, so they don't get access to green finance in most cases. Then the certification process also has been streamlined. In EDGE, we got this input from many people saying that these processes have become way too complex. They just use up too much time and effort. Can we have something that's simpler, that uses less of our time and energy? So we've tried to do that through a simple software, an online software that I'll quickly show some screenshots of, making that easily available, freely available, allowing anybody anywhere in the world to put in their information and very quickly assess their building, compare against a baseline, and then figure out what are the improvement opportunities, and then try to meet those standards. And then we've set up a third-party audit system, which is what most other systems, most other certifications of international recognition use as well. And so that when you go out and talk to an investor, talk to a customer, talk to a client, or to the government, you have valid proof from a trusted agency saying that this is really going to provide that positive climate impact and economic impact to our building. So the EDGE certification basically is using that free software, achieving a standard, a performance standard of at least a 20% reduction in resource efficiency, in resource use rather, and then getting it verified by a third party certifier. The software looks like this, where you just go in and plug in the details. The standard is across 3 categories: 20% reduction in energy consumption, 20% reduction in water consumption, and 20% reduction in material consumption, embodied energy of your construction material, meaning the manufacturing energy of those materials. Now, they're all compared not against some fictitious or some global baseline that may not be applicable to your location, to your building type. We have developed local baselines for every single building type, every location, every major location across the world. So you can actually compare against your own cities, your own building types baseline. So once you get certified, meet those standards, and you're able to report on the carbon impact, then you may be able to access green finance that many global investors, global climate finance certifiers are now working on. So at the bottom, you see some of those global standards that are out there right now. And EDGE is very closely aligned with all of them. So basically, if your project gets an EDGE certification, the chances of getting access to green finance really increases. EDGE assessment can be done for any of those building types, except for heavy manufacturing facilities. You can do any building, whether it's a new building or an existing building that's being retrofitted, or even if it's not being retrofitted, it's in existence for many years and you want to know what the performance level of the building, you can use EDGE to certify that. And this can also be done at a portfolio level, which provides many more kind of advantages, because then you get portfolio-wide benchmarks and targets that you can have. If you meet the minimum 20-20-20 standard, then you are EDGE certified. If you increase your energy performance to 40%, then you get EDGE advanced. And then after an EDGE advanced certification, over a period of 1 year, if you show that all your remaining energy needs are coming from renewable sources, then the project can get a zero carbon certification. So this certification system has been in place for a few years now, and it has seen drastic growth. In India, we are the fastest growing green building certification with some dramatic growth, 12 million square meters of green building footprint, basically all buildings certified or in the process of getting certified already. And we seeing a lot of attraction for this certification system now. So the certification system is simple. You go and assess your project in the app, and then you get an auditor and get it certified through the global certification partner. The cost is typically about 10,000 USD, which varies depending on the project type and size. There are 2 certifiers available, and a lot of this information is available on our website at edgebuildings.com. You can get quotation from both and decide which one to go with. The EDGE software just looks like this. I'll very quickly flip through some of the screenshots there. So you go to edgebuildings.com, click the button which says EDGE app, select your building type and your location, and start entering basic information, your floor area, number of floors, etc. And then you can start analyzing your base case, where is your energy currently being used, and what are the options to improve the energy performance. As you do that in real time, you get an impact on the energy performance and also on the capital cost and operational cost, and also on the carbon emissions. So you can do that with water as well, and also materials. And in the end, what you see is an overall report, which tells you what the utility cost reduction is, what the incremental cost and payback is, and the carbon emission saved. This is something that you can use for reporting as well. So it's a financial calculator that really helps you simplify your design process and impact reporting. And we, as the World Bank Group, really help market those projects that get certified as well. I'll skip the zero carbon thing. I already talked to you about this. You require to have documentation of your actual energy consumption and report it. And then this will really help you in meeting the zero carbon pathway that we talked about, trying to optimize your portfolio performance by focusing on existing buildings first, new buildings first, and then existing buildings later. So these are some of the examples of projects that have recently met some of those targets. This is our first zero carbon ready project in Ahmedabad. This is a project in Hyderabad, which is showing very high levels of energy efficiency, 77% reduction. And then there are multiple projects of all sorts around the world that you can find case studies on our website. I will stop here actually, because I think we have run out of time. So I'll hand it back to Jayshree and see if there are any questions. But let me just conclude by saying that this is technically not a major challenge. It's just that we have to be careful on how we design our buildings right from the beginning, how we communicate about our design to the decision makers, and how we get access to better financing, green financing that's now increasingly available. And if we focus on all these three, we'll be better prepared for the future. So back to Jayashree. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Atif. I'm sure that was a very, very enlightening, knowledge session for everyone. We have a couple of questions that I would like. Is EDGE certification a requirement to apply for IFC funding? If so, is there a minimum target?
So green certification that is internationally accepted is a requirement, or I would say it's a preference. Almost all our real estate investments now are going into green projects, green certified projects, and EDGE is definitely one of those options. The minimum requirement is 20%. So the EDGE certified standard, which is 20% reduction on energy efficiency, on energy use, is the minimum requirement.
Are there regular changes in green building codes? How does it work in India?
Are there regular changes in green building codes? So right now in India, we don't really have a green building code as such. We have an energy efficiency code, ECBC, which, as I mentioned earlier, has been implemented in some jurisdictions, some states, but not fully. And the first version came in 2007, and the new one came out in 2017. And then there is a new one that has come out for residential as well. So there have been 3 versions basically. And there is some compliance happening now. And we are hoping that this would continue to increase. And eventually there will be a green building code requiring some mandatory design features and efficiencies across all buildings.
The last question, what is the extent of green materials that one should use to qualify for a certification? Extent
of green materials. So actually, green materials is a very kind of relative term. How do you classify a greenness of a material? With EDGE, what we've said is the greenness of the material is figured out by the overall performance of the building. And that's what really matters. So you may use like an excellent green wall material, for example. But if your, let's say your other materials are not very green, so maybe it is not sufficient. So what we do is allow a lot of flexibility in the material choices, in the choice of equipment, in the choice of design feature. And what we focus is on the performance. As you saw on the EDGE app, there are multiple options and you don't have to select all options. You just pick and choose any combination of measures that you prefer. And if the overall impact is at least a 20% saving on energy, water, and material, we classify that as a green, regardless of which material they've used.
So is there anything that you'd like to add, Auditor, or shall we end this session?
Maybe one more thing I would like to add here. So if you go to edgebuildings.com, we have provided a lot of resources. If anybody is interested in, for example, knowing more about the EDGE app, user guides available. There is a methodology report available. So you can go through that, downloadable all for free. Even the EDGE app is completely free of charge. You don't need to pay anything for it. Even if you're not going for EDGE certification, you can still use the EDGE app and kind of quantify and evaluate your own building. And on the website, you will also find resources for training. So there are different kinds of training available. There are training available for university students. This training is available in a face-to-face format as a course that is now being taught in about 20 universities, 20 colleges across India. It is also available as an online course, which is right now for free. There might be a charge in the future, but right now it's completely free. And then there is a course for professionals. It's a one-day training course that called an EDGE expert training. So for anybody who really wants to go into more details and try to figure out how to exactly consult on green buildings, they can take up that course as well. So feel free to use those, access those courses. And if you have any question, feel free to contact us and we'll guide you on that. So Yunus has asked if the project is already aiming for LEED, would it still need to consider EDGE to increase chances? So I assume you're talking about chances for green finance. So there are multiple standards around and most of them do recognize LEED. So LEED would be eligible for green finance in most cases, I would say. But again, we need to check which finance you're trying to access and make sure their criteria includes LEED if a project is going to LEED. what we have seen really is a lot of projects have chosen Edge because they find it simpler to use, because there is an app that they can use to analyze the project. They don't need to follow a standard that may not be as relevant for their country. So that's one reason we're seeing a lot of projects that would otherwise have gone for lead going to Edge now. Rohit has asked, what is the process of applying for Edge Auditor accreditation? So Rohit, you need to, if you're interested, you need to attend a training, the Edge Expert training, Expert and Auditor training. And this is available online as well. And once that training is done, there is an online exam that can be given. And if the exam, you pass the exam, then you can be accredited as an auditor. And then there is a certain continuation also that's required. So if you do a project, if you audit a project, then it is automatically extended, your accreditation. Otherwise, every couple of years, you have to go for more training. One more question. Somebody's asked, as a lender, we are keen to support our clients for their sustainability goals through various financing instruments, of which sustainability linked loan is getting more and more popular. In short, we provide some pricing incentives. The KPIs should be easy to quantify. Do you have any suggestion on setting up sustainable KPIs for green buildings? So the KPI that we use, as I mentioned, is fairly simple. In fact, there is a lot of focus now on carbon emissions, on impact on climate. So that is.
Can you repeat yourself again? We lost you.
Yeah, the question is, are there any sustainable KPIs that we would recommend for green buildings? So I was saying that the most predominant KPI, the most commonly used KPI is impact on climate as measured through carbon emissions. There are certain agencies that also look at impact on energy consumption, impact on water consumption, and a few other things, but carbon emissions is the biggest one. And I see almost all major climate standards and climate investors are looking at that.
He's also asking, is there something for existing buildings?
Yes, you can use Edge for existing buildings as well. And the way to do that would be to evaluate using the same criteria. So you put in your project details, it will give you the baseline, and then you put in your existing building specifications in the app and say, my building had this kind of a wall material, this kind of windows, these kind of air conditioning and water systems, and it will evaluate and compare against the baseline and tell you whether you're already meeting the standard. If not, then you can tweak some measures and say, okay, this is the change I need to make to meet those standards. And if the wall material is already, or the construction is already in existence for more than 5 years, then you can get credit for that, saying that we're not breaking down this building and making a new building. We are reusing the existing building material. So you get credit on the material side for existing building.
I think that's all that we have. Thank you, Auditor. Thank you so much. And thank you, my dear audience. I mean, you've been very patient. I hope there are lots of learnings from this session. Of course, you can always get in touch with us or with Auditor to understand more. Thank you.